Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I hope you are all doing very well. Continuing with my discussion of the works of the films directed by John Carpenter, I'd like now, if I may, to talk to you about a film that was released in 1984. The name of this film is Starman. Before I continue with my discussion of Starman, let me talk about this particular Region A Blu-ray release that I have from Shout Factory, Scream Factory. This is a collector's edition, and this is of the film Starman. Now, I have it with this particular cover here, but it's still just as good a film with or without this cover, in my opinion. The cover art is this particular moment, or it's a depiction or representation of Starman, and this, I think, represents the outer space element of the film Starman. Also, it represents a particular moment of the film early on in the film where Starman has adopted the likeness of the human character Scott. And this is providing the essential thrust of the narrative focus of the film, namely Starman in this form, in this human form, and his relationship with the Karen Allen character as they try to traverse the American countryside, essentially, trying to get to a particular place in Arizona before it is too late for Starman. And so it's a very evocative cover. It's really nice. And also what's great about this Blu-ray release is that it has the collection of theatrical trailers and TV spots and the like, and also a pictured gallery. But also it has a vintage making of featurette, which was made, I think, contemporaneously at the time. And so we have contemporary interviews given at the time by John Carpenter and Jeff Bridges and Karen Allen, and talking about specific aspects of the film and the production, as well as showing us behind the scenes footage. It's a really great, it's termed a vintage featurette, but it's really great, and it has still footage that feels fresh, and there is and also Charles Martin Smith discussion, and also this kind of great, how should I put it, a great perspective given by John Carpenter at the time. And also we have, together with that vintage featurette that's featured on this Blu-ray, a contemporary or a modern-made featurette, which has, among other people, it has John Carpenter being interviewed, it has Jeff Bridges being interviewed, it has Sandy King Carpenter also being interviewed, and it also has Charles Martin Smith being interviewed. And so we have them basically being interviewed, looking back on their experiences during the making of Starman. I should say that all these interviews are really wonderful. Jeff Bridges is charming as always. He brings a lot of interesting anecdotes about the film, and he's also very generous. He is incredibly generous about his co-stars, in particular Karen Allen, which is really nice because unfortunately Karen Allen doesn't appear in the featurette, but it's nice to hear Jeff Bridges speak of her and her performance in warm, glowing tones, and I think her performance really deserves it, because it's really, I think, a really fantastic performance, and hopefully I'll get a chance to talk a little bit about it later on in this video. Also, Sandy King provides some interesting background. She also provides an interesting insight into how she ended up being part of the crew in the first place, and about how she sort of wrote a letter rather sort of not quite thinking about it, but it ended up getting her the job, or at least that's the way that's the way it appears. And so I think that's a very interesting anecdote. So it's interesting to check that out. Also, what's great is to hear Charles Martin Smith's take on the film. I'm going to talk about it later, but I really love Charles Martin Smith. He is a wonderful actor and a great presence, and he brings such a lovely, warm presence to this film, irrespective of the fact that his character might not necessarily be necessarily trustworthy. Or not. I mean, we find out more about his character as the film progresses, of course, but to hear Charles Martin Smith talk about the film and how he had great admiration for the script, how he felt that John Carpenter was a really great director, not only in terms of the set pieces and the action set pieces, but also as an actor's director, and how John Carpenter was really helping the actors through the process. I thought that was really wonderful and generous of Charles Martin Smith to say. And also he's quite praiseworthy about certain scenes of the film, about how he thought in particular about a certain ending sequence was really well constructed and well crafted, to the point where he thought that he made the comment that this really should be taught in film school. And I thought that was really such an interesting comment to make, and so I really value Charles Martin Smith's comments as he made them in this documentary. And then last but certainly not least is the appearance of John Carpenter himself, who is always he talks about this film in very warm terms, and he mentions the actors, and he has nothing but praise for them, and he has nothing but warm words and nice feelings about them. And he talks about this film as a film of depicting positivity, a positive vibe in this film, and how and it was a nice, in many ways it might be seen as a nice change of pace, given that he might have been known more as a horror director, and he made certain films in the past that might be considered quite dark. Well, Starman, I think, is in many ways quite a unique film in that respect. But I think we will also find that Starman is also quite relevant, and also has many connections with John Carpenter's past films, and hopefully I'll try to get a chance to talk about that. But the point I wanted to bring up here is that John Carpenter is he's very generous, and he's very modest, and it's wonderful to hear him speak in these tones, talking about this film, looking back on the past like this. And so this is it's not an overlong feature, but it's nice to have, and so that's really wonderful. I forgot to mention one thing, which is that there is also a really nice audio commentary track that's included with this particular release. So this has a commentary track which features John Carpenter and Jeff Bridges, and they're talking about this film, watching it, and having a conversation. I really like it because it has a nice down-to-earth quality, and it's really nice to hear these two gentlemen talk about this, and they talk about it in glowing terms, but they're also very casual about it, as I think is the case with many of the John Carpenter commentary tracks. This is no exception to that. It's a lovely listen, and this is another reason why I think I really am enamored by this particular Shout Factory release of the film. So with that, my friends, let me now say that I will be talking about this film with certain degree of specificity. And so if you haven't seen this film yet, I would suggest that you stop this video right now and watch the film at your own at your own pace and leisure, in your own time, of course. And when you've finished watching the film, my friends, you can come back to this video, and at that time it would be my pleasure to hear your thoughts and comments about this very moving work by John Carpenter. And this is the film Starman. Okay, so you're back, which means you have seen the film Starman, directed by John Carpenter and starring Jeff Bridges and Karen Allen and Charles Martin Smith, and also Richard Jekyll, and directed by John Carpenter, of course, and with a really tender love story at its heart, at its crux. This is really great because this, in many respects, one might consider this to be a film that is unique in the filmography of John Carpenter up to now. We didn't necessarily see any strong or direct presentation of a love story at the fore of a particular film. There have been some moments in past John Carpenter films where we had love stories, where we had stories between certain characters that have come together in some way. But I would suggest that perhaps they haven't necessarily been the direct focus of the film entirely. Of course, we've seen love stories or romances or developments between human beings as depicted in, say, the film Elvis, Someone's Watching Me, even to a certain degree, Assault on Precinct 13. And that sort of thing. But they were never necessarily at the fore. Perhaps the closest that we might have come to seeing a love story that was at the forefront of the film prior to Starman, I would say arguably is the film Christine, which is the film prior to this, where we had the love story between Arnie and Christine at the center of that. Well, here we have something that is, on the one hand, similar to Christine in that we have at its focus this growing relationship between two characters. But perhaps contrasting with the earlier film Christine, we have a relationship that, at least as depicted in the context and the philosophy of the film Starman, this particular relationship between Starman, the Jeff Bridges character, and Jenny, the Karen Allen character, I think we can safely say is a very positive one. It is one where we have a character, two characters learning about each other and learning about oneself as the film is progressing. We have on the one hand the Starman character who is essentially trying to mimic and copy certain aspects of humanity and daily living and existence and the English language and that sort of thing as they encounter these different people along the way on their road trip, and also as he's trying to adopt to certain ways and certain expressions, and how he's trying to learn about things and learn about eating and smoking and also money and these sorts of things. But also on a tender and intimate level, he's trying to learn also about the meaning of things like what is beautiful, define love, what does it mean to say goodbye, and these sorts of things. And so that adds, as he learns about these things, of course, that adds layer upon layer of emotional dimension to the Starman character, which I find very moving, and it leads to a very emotional conclusion at the end there. And then on the other side of the equation, of course, we have the Karen Allen performance of Jenny, which I think is also one about a sort of inner journey, if you will, an inner quest for discovery. At the outset of the film, of course, we have the character already in a state of loss, because by the start of the film, the real love of her life, Scott, is already dead due to an accident. And so we find her still perhaps in a state of mourning, and also a state of kind of loss in a way. And we see her alone in her cabin, essentially drinking wine and looking back on the Super 8 footage of her and Scott in much happier times. And so, and she knows that it's probably not good for her to do this, but she wants to do it anyway. And this is the context, of course, where Starman crash lands into the neighboring woods, and then he comes in, and then, or as a ball of light, of course, and then finds the lock of hair as well as other images and stuff, and decides to clone himself into the image and body of Scott, the Jeff Bridges character, and that leads to the start of the film, essentially. But at the start, right, the Karen Allen character is in a state of loss, but also along the way, she begins, of course, to have certain emotional attachments to Starman, up to the point where they're expressing love towards each other. And it was a slow process, of course. It was a slow, gradual process, because at first she was very scared of him. She wanted to get away. She was thinking that she was being kidnapped. She tries to escape at certain points of the film. But along the way, she started to sympathize with the situation. First, she learned about the Starman's limited time here. He has to be at a certain place, at a certain crater, in 3 days. Otherwise, he will be left behind and he will die on this planet. And so that starts a feeling of sympathy towards his plight, and so that at least compels her to move forward, at least to a certain degree. And then she learns more about him, and she learns that in many ways he is like a very smart and gifted being, but also like a child, and not knowing what things are, what things mean and what things are. But he still possesses these very special gifts and special powers. Sometimes they're expressed in these silver orbs, these silver balls. But also there is a very powerful scene where we see the Karen Allen character, Jenny, look and observe as the Starman brings a dead deer back to life. And this is, I think, the moment, or it's a culmination of some of the conflict that she has been feeling up to now. Up to now, she's been trying to escape, and she wanted to escape. And in fact, at that moment, she was thinking about getting on a bus and escaping, leaving behind some credit cards and keys for the Starman to continue on his journey alone. But this is the point where she feels that she has been convinced now that she wants to go along with him on his journey towards the crater somewhere in Arizona, and so that she wants to be with him at this point. And so that is a really I think powerful moment. And along the way too, we also get her descriptions of her relationship with Scott when he was still alive, and how they met, and how she felt about him, and how she felt about him when he was gone, and what it is for her to love, and what it means to love. Also, we get glimpses of her about how she and Scott were trying to have a child, but she was not able to have children. And so this is a little bit of information about her that is translated later on into the film, where the two of them become physically intimate. And later, after that moment, Starman reveals that he essentially what did he say? He says he gave her a baby. In other words, she has become expecting with his child. And of course, he is cloned as Scott, so in one sense, it is Scott's child, or the human Jeff Bridges' child, but in another sense, it's a Starman's child as well. And so Starman says, he will grow up to know what he knows, and he'll grow up to become a teacher. And so there's that. And so there's this kind of self-discovery that the Karen Allen character is on. She not only has to revisit what her past relationship was, but in an interesting way, her relationship with Starman progresses forward in certain aspects. Her past relationship with Scott, I think, culminating in the point where she becomes expectant she is expecting a child. And so that is an interesting way in which the relationship has developed. And it's an extension of her relationship with Scott that has developed, which I think is an interesting way of looking at the film. And so for her as well as for him, I think the film is in a way a kind of self-discovery. Incidentally, I should mention that the Karen Allen performance, I think, is really remarkable, really, really remarkable, because she has to do a number of things at once. She has to register a certain sense of awe and fear upon encountering this alien life form for the first time, and then also being kidnapped and being shocked. And not only that, but also encountering this alien life form that is in the form of her basically dead husband. And so there's a lot of shock going on, and then along the way she has to look at him in a way that she thinks this is a really strange guy, and the way that her eyes are moving, and that sort of thing. I think her performance needs that in order to sustain the illusion that the Jeff Bridges character is indeed an alien. So she has to do that. She also has to carry the weight of the past relationship that she had with her now dead husband, Scott. And this is very important because that is the emotional weight of her character. That is her that is the kind of anchor that her character has, and that is something that I think makes her very sympathetic as well from the eyes of the viewer. Now she has to carry this in an interesting way because Jeff Bridges in the film is not Scott. It's not her husband. It's Starman, who is in the image of her dead husband. And so she can't rely necessarily on interactions with Starman, at least at the most of the film anyway, in order to evoke those feelings of a relationship that she had with the human being Jeff Bridges' character. She has to essentially to show those or say those and then express those feelings in a sort of unilateral way, and she's explaining to Starman what her relationship was. So it's an interesting position that she finds herself in. She's with someone who looks like her husband, but it's not her husband. But she is in her heart carrying this emotional weight and love and devotion to her now dead husband. And so she has to carry that alone, and she has to be able to explain that. But also, along the way, those feelings that she has tend to transform into something where ultimately she is in a state of mind where she ends up loving the Starman. And perhaps she loves him for the way that she reminds him of her past love, perhaps, but also maybe on Starman's own terms. And I would suggest even the latter, because she says, please take me with you. I want to go to your planet. I don't care if I will die on your planet, etc. And so and show me where you live. And I want to tell my now unborn son about his father. And she asks him to show him in the stars where his home is, and so that sort of thing. So it's not like she is talking necessarily about the human aspect of the cloned sense of the Starman, but she's asking about the Starman aspects of the Starman, also about his world, and about, does he have a wife at home? Does he have someone like me back home? And he replies no, of course. And so there is the sense that perhaps she is loving the Starman for the Starman rather than loving him for the way he reminds her of her past love, which is an interesting development in her own emotional state, I think. And I think that's an interesting development from her initial state, and how she was carrying that huge emotional weight of the loss of her past love, but then it grows into something quite interesting at the film's conclusion. And so I really want to praise Karen Allen here. Like I said, I think she has some tough work to do here, and she pulls it off, I think, really, really well, and to the point where we really are following her, and we really are rooting for her, and we're hoping that she succeeds. And of course, what she is hoping to do is to help Starman get to the crater, essentially, in time before it's too late. And speaking of Starman, I should also mention that Jeff Bridges is really quite remarkable. I love the Shout Factory documentary here, because there was mentions of how Jeff Bridges was probably trying to mimic birds, and there was also talk about how he was trying to talk to acquaintances of his who are dancers and trying to get some physicality in his performance. You can tell the way he moves his body first, and then his head, and then he moves his head in a very curious way, like a bird would. the way he does that with his facial expressions and his head movements. And he also has a childlike quality to his demeanor and how his face seems to be registering that he's trying to soak up as much information as possible. This is really quite evident when he is alone in one of the motel rooms and Karen Allen is asleep and he's just sitting there by himself watching the TV and just looking and figuring out and again soaking up more information about the human race and human existence. So I love that about his performance, and it's really great too because he has a way of speaking that is, I think, very cold and very monotone at first, but it gradually mellows out into it's still not quite but human speak necessarily. There's still a little bit of alienness to his manner of speaking, which I think is done on purpose. But it mellows out to the point where by the end, his speech patterns are very much in tune with our ear, and so we are used to it, and it's almost quite endearing and charming. And it's lovely to see the rapport between him and Karen Allen grow and develop in that way. And so I think that his performance is quite remarkable in that respect, and very moving, very moving. Speaking of Starman, let me just say before I move on, what I also love about this film is its progress and development. You know, the whole concept of Starman as a character is that he is here, and he is here on his ship essentially crash landed, and he's trying to get to a certain place, but he got caught along the way, and so now he's trying to get to the place, and with Karen Allen's help, essentially. Along the way, he is learning as he is going along, and so he's picking up things from Karen Allen. He's picking up things from the surroundings. He's picking up things when he ordered the Dutch apple pie and the waitress gave the it's fantastic, and he tries to mimic the same language that was just used by people around him, and just also not only that, he's asking questions. He's asking questions of Karen Allen. You know, what does love mean? What does it mean to say goodbye? What does it mean beautiful? And there are other things that sometimes can be seen as comic moments when Karen Allen is trying to explain to him about men and women and in the context of the restrooms at the gas station, for instance, and that sort of thing. But what I love about it is that everything is set up such that Starman learns something that ends up being paid off a little bit later, which I think is really great. When he is, it's the waitress who says fantastic, and then after that he is able to say fantastic, that sort of thing. When he is hitchhiked with one of the cooks, and is talking about, his daughter wants to be a doctor, but everything costs money, and so he's asked, what do you do? And he says, I make maps. And he says, you make money? And he says, I make maps. So there ain't much money in that, right? So, and that's where he gets the idea of money, which then pays off later when the two of them, Karen Allen and Jeff Bridges, end up in Las Vegas, and they have to try to get money in order to be able to get a car or rent a car. Well, they get more than enough because of Starman's abilities to play the jackpots, of course, which is really great because she lost her wallet, or she couldn't find her wallet. And so my point is that there are all these setups that are paid off much later. One of my favorites is also, he's talking about he has such a reaction to the Dutch apple pie, and later he says, as he's driving, it's his talking about his world. It's very beautiful, but not beautiful like this. He will miss the things that he did here, like eating and the other things, and so and I love that kind of payoff. And there's a lovely payoff too with the idea of the little orbs, and those orbs that have magical powers, and that the Karen Allen character who is now expecting is given the one last orb that he has just before he's about to leave him, and she asks, how will I know what to do with this? And he says, your baby will know. Paraphrasing that, of course. And so I love that, because the orbs were an interesting little device that were used throughout the film in one way or another, and they were meant to show that Starman had these really superpowers that were on hand, but only when he was able to use these orbs, and they were finite in number, of course. Sometimes they were used in a way that could show information. It would be helpful, like he used one of the orbs to create a map of the United States, sort of an interactive map. He also used one of the orbs in a kind of destructive way when you had the car swerved off on purpose because she wanted to escape, and she was trying to get the attention of the next car that passed by. And so just before the driver came and challenged Starman, there was an explosion that was caused, etc. And so my point is that these orbs seem to be the source not only of positive energy but of potentially negative energy. But what was really quite miraculous about this in the context of the story is that, of course, one of the orbs was used in the context of saving her life after she was shot by some police officers that were trying to apprehend them, of course. So, and this pays off, I think, really rather brilliantly at the very end when he gives her the final orb before he goes off back home and says, this is, the baby will know what to do with this. I thought that was a really lovely moment. So my point is that there are many moments that are set up and that are paid off later. And they're small moments sometimes, but they're also quite grander moments. And the grander moments, I think, serve a narrative purpose. But I think whether they be big or small, they all serve a way to add layer upon layer upon layer of human and emotional dimension to these characters and to the story that makes it very moving and potentially incredibly moving at the film's climax. So I really want to praise the way in which the story is put together. I also want to say that I think as much as I am praising the story, I think one of the potentially weak parts of the film, at least for me, but I'll explain, is the antagonist side. The government and the government agents, in particular, led by the Richard Jekyll character and the Charles Martin Smith character. I think I'm not sure, but I think on the one hand, there isn't necessarily much of a threat. We were talking about the prior film that John Carpenter did, which is Christine, which is, of course, based off of a novel by Stephen King. I think what's so great about Stephen King's works is that he really knows how to develop nasty bad guys, and so and sometimes they are government operatives or government agents or something like that. And so I thought this film, in one sense, was lacking a really big, heavy. True, maybe the Fox character, the Richard Jekyll character, might stand in for being the heavy of the film. And there are some moments where he is quite potentially nasty, but that isn't necessarily shown through ultimately by the film's end. And so I don't know if we ever get a sense of the true threat and menace of the antagonists here. We get shots of the helicopters and the guns and they're armed and they're shooting at our couple here, but I don't know if we never necessarily get a real sense of the urgent threat that they pose. And the same is true for the Charles Martin Smith character, although I should point out that I think this is done on purpose, and also this is, I think, one of the strengths, in fact, of the film, namely that his character, who is a government, or is working for the government, and although he describes it as being he's kind of on loan, which I think is a really nice way of casting his character, making him a little bit aloof from the rest of the team, and also giving him a sense of ambiguity as far as his allegiances are concerned, which is, I think, really great, because Charles Martin Smith as an actor has that really down-to-earth, lovable quality to him. You just see him and you automatically just love him and love his presence. And so to see him as kind of the bad guy pursuing these characters is a little bit off-putting, because I admit there are some moments during the film where I wasn't quite sure where his allegiances will ultimately lie. Would he make a really sharp turn and become a really, really bad guy? As we know from the film, of course, that doesn't happen. And in fact, he is, I think, true to our expectations of him as this kind of character actor, which is really great, because it's wonderful to root for him as an actor, as the character that he's playing, and also he really gives off this wonderful, warm, charming quality, curiosity, earnestness, but also trying to do the good thing. Because as he says, as he's trying to appeal to Fox, based on this, the probe that was sent out into space in the first place, which then attracted these alien species to try to go to Earth. Essentially, right? He's right in that we invited them in the first place, and so we invited them, and now we want to kill them. That makes absolutely no sense. And so it's wonderful to see him grounded this way, Charles Martin Smith character grounded this way, and he becomes ever so likable, and the way he figures into helping the two of them escape is also so charming. There's that lovely moment where we see him and talking to the two of them in the diner for the first time, and just to see his wonder and awe, and just trying to, because this is the first he is talking to extraterrestrial life for the first time, essentially, and he just can't hide his awestruck look on his face. He's like a little boy, and then that scene is played out in such a great way, where it cuts and then we see Karen Allen kissing him and says thank you, and we see Jeff Bridges kissing him and saying thank you, because we realize that he is helping them escape, or at least helping them get a head start. And so that is a great turn for the character, and we realize that he is a good guy, and we're glad for that. So I love that. And that, again, mellows out the antagonistic element of the threat of the film, yes, but it also adds a warm dimension to that aspect, and as led by Charles Martin Smith. And it creates a really nice positive triumvirate, if you will, with Charles Martin Smith, Karen Allen, and Jeff Bridges there. And I really appreciate that very much so. And I return to my earlier comment about how maybe the threat from the government might not necessarily seem that threatening, at least as depicted in this film. But and I suggested that for me that might be a little bit of a detriment to the film. But perhaps another way to look at that, my friends, is that this film's purpose and philosophy seems to be of a positive nature. And we know this because of the way the film progresses to its climax, and Starman is able to join his people and leave Earth without necessarily dying. And also he leaves behind life, and he has given some kind of sustenance and love and emotional happiness and satisfaction vis-a-vis the Karen Allen character. And so there is an emotional satisfaction at the film's conclusion, which I think is very positive. There are also depictions of positivity in terms of the alien race. Everything is one law. No one who is stronger takes advantage of the weak. There is one language. So there is peace. And so there's that, and also Starman makes a description about why he admires the human race, because they are, and I paraphrase, when they are at their weakest is when they are at their strongest. And so there are these messages of positivity that are just throughout the film, given so much weight. And I really think that this approach means, therefore, that the focus, therefore, should be on the human characters and the relationships, not necessarily on the threat and the chase, as it were, although that's part of the film as well. But I think the fact that we're focusing in on this positive element means that maybe we need to, therefore, think about the relationships and the views towards humanity, the views towards society, and the outcomes and the denouement and the resolutions of these characters, from dark places to more positive, light-filled places. And so that might mean that we focus on those things more so than the peripheral threat from Fox and the armed helicopters, as it were. And so maybe that's the point of the film. Speaking of which, let me also say that as a film directed by John Carpenter, this is a remarkable achievement. It is not it feels like a science fiction film on the one hand, of course, because there are many scenes that have a science fiction bent. There are the scenes, especially in the beginning, in outer space, and the planets, and the crash landing with the pyrotechnics, and also, of course, I think the biggest one of all is probably the transformation scene, where we see the orb of light coming in and examining the paraphernalia of the Jeff Bridges character who had died, and then looking through the pictures and the lock of hair, and we go and zoom in to the lock of hair, and then we suddenly see the transformation from a baby to a grown, naked Jeff Bridges, Starman. I think that's probably the biggest special effects highlight of the film. So there are science fiction elements to this film, don't get me wrong, but of course at its core, in terms of the majority of scenes here, we do get what in a sense is a road movie love story that is akin to some of the great films of our age. The great road movies like that we've seen, like Paris, Texas, or the great love stories like It Happened One Night, or films, love stories of Frank Capra, for instance. That sort of thing, where we have characters on a journey, traversing the American countryside, looking for something, and along the way, not necessarily liking each other at first, but gradually beginning to like each other and respecting each other, and then ultimately falling in love with each other. I mean, these are really wonderful American stories, and set against the backdrop of a moving American landscape. The rugged hills, the rocky landscape, the motels, the diners, the wooded environments, and the people that populate this area, from just regular people that are just drinking coffee at a diner road stop, or people who are working in a gas station, or just people just driving a truck along a deserted highway, that sort of thing. This is a road movie. This is a love story. This is also a depiction of America, and in that sense, it feels like maybe on its surface it might seem like it's not a typical John Carpenter film, but the more I think about it, the more I realize that it is a very, very typical John Carpenter film, in that it feels like it's a kind of love letter to America, or this aspect of American culture. And also, it is a focus on an intense relationship between two human beings that leads to a particular result and change in the characters, which you have seen in past John Carpenter films. And we do get this sense of a threat that is thwarted in some way, and that is also at the heart of many other John Carpenter films. But at the same time, this does feel somewhat unique in John Carpenter's filmography, in the sense that we are focusing on not necessarily a film for the sake of genre expectations. We are focusing in on a film that in many respects goes against one's expectations, and instead goes towards different avenues of human drama exploration, exploration. Here we are talking about the development of a relationship between two people that aren't necessarily on the same page at the very beginning. They aren't even of the same species, but they grow in a very interesting way, ultimately to the point where at the end, when they have to say goodbye to each other, it becomes very moving indeed. I love this because it shows that John Carpenter has a real great command over performance and over creating a sense of really deep human emotion that can really last and linger, and that has a real powerful resonance even as the credits roll. So I think this is, on the one hand, a unique John Carpenter film experience, but also on the other hand, one might see it as being a very, it has close connections with past John Carpenter films, and it is a science fiction film, but is, I think, not a science fiction film. It is a film about characters trying to learn about each other and about themselves on their journey, which is both metaphorical and also quite physical and real, in the sense that it is a road journey. It is a road film, and it becomes, in that sense, a road film, buddy film that is set against the backdrop of a rugged Americana. And in those terms, I think it makes perfect sense in the filmography of John Carpenter. This is a really wonderful film. It's so moving and so great, and I think it really works in many respects. This is the film Starman. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. Do you have any thoughts or comments about this film, Starman? If you do, I would love to hear what it is you have to say. Please feel free to let me know in the comment section below, and it'll be my pleasure to read them. So, thank you very much for joining me for now. So, until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. So, until we meet again, my friends. Cheers.